everybody. Welcome to this second session of the study with Ajith of the Vanguard in the 21st Century from Ajith book of Concepts and Methods. So we messed up. We totally got wrong with the time zones, and we sent a mail saying that it will be tomorrow for people in North America. It's today, so we're sorry about that. Yeah, like all of you guys like did your part, sending us like the summaries and the questions, and yeah, and we messed up. So like that sucks, and we are really sorry about that. I hope that everybody can be here, and if you can be here, if you are watching the recording later, well, again, we're sorry. For the others, hopefully you had a chance to watch the first session of the study that happened yesterday. Yeah, so today we will continue as we were doing yesterday. So the question will be discussed by Ajith, Suraf, Lance, with still JMP as a moderator. So yeah, remember this webinar. So the only way you can interact is by asking question in the Q&A section. You have button in the bottom of your screen. So yeah, you can ask a question whenever you want. See that someone is already asking 2 questions. Not really, but yeah. So have a nice session. Enjoy. And yeah, that's it from my side. Bye.
Okay, so we're into the second part of this. For some of us, like myself, it's the same day, just at night. And my other discussant, it's the next morning. Yeah, so what we've been discussing, the Vanguard of the 21st Century, as everyone knows, which is an essay, again, in this book, just to shamelessly plug it, to go out and get it. It's an excellent book altogether with a lot of other really great essays in it too. And we went through a number of the questions that people had sent to us ahead of time. In the first half, this half that was for me this morning and for my comrade discussants was last night for them. And and then we had some live question and answering that we got to. And we weren't able to get to the last question that came in at the very end, right when we were kind of wrapping things up. And that last one was, the question about what do we mean when we say the masses? And I said this morning for me and last night for the others that we would, when we pick this up again, we would start with this question. And so I want to put it to the panel group. Let's begin with this question. What or who do we mean when we say the masses? And I'm going to start with you, Ajith.
All right. Thank you. This the term masses. Am I clear? Disappear from this. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay,
just
fine.
Maybe just speak up a little bit louder.
Okay. This term masses is quite a broad one, and what exactly we mean by that would very much depend upon the specific type of country that we are discussing. Like, for example, it would mean one thing in an imperialist country and something totally different or varied in an oppressed country. So in the context of an oppressed country, very broadly, when you speak of the masses, it would mean all the sections of people who could possibly come within a united front against the enemies of the revolution, that is imperialism, the competitive bureaucrat bourgeoisie, and feudalism, the 3 mountains that have to be overthrown, which would mean it could also possibly at times include the national bourgeoisie, because they too are an oppressed section under the conditions existing in these countries, and at times they do mobilize and come out to struggle. So, I mean, for example, in the ongoing farmers' agitation going on in India, particularly in northern part of India, you can see that there is quite a significant section of the small landlords of Punjab and Haryana and Western UP, who are otherwise fairly wealthy and are oppressors in their local context, or the commission agents of the agriculture produce markets, who are quite in control of the whole scene there. I mean, the scene, not only the market of the whole rural areas, because they sort of concentrate everything in their hands, the input market as well as the output market. All of these people are out in struggle. And definitely one would consider them as part of the masses in this particular context. So that's what I pointed out by saying that one has to look at the specific type of the country and the context also. Now, another thing that one has to keep in mind, I think, is that the masses, being a broad category, one should not forget that they are also divided into classes. So a Maoist orientation would be that of going to the bottommost level of the masses, of sinking roots there, of building your base there, and relying on that to carry out your revolutionary activities, even while you unite with all the other sections of the masses. For example, there are quite significant sections of the petty bourgeoisie. And I suppose in an imperialist country, the characteristics of the petty bourgeoisie would be more, perhaps, I don't know exactly, but more perhaps closer to the, what do you say, of the upper sections of society, the light sections of society, of the middle bourgeoisie and all that. But that by itself does not take it out of the category of the masses. Because ultimately what has to be decided is, in a class analysis, what exactly is the position of this petty bourgeois section? Is it a part of the broad category of people who are to be rallied up, united with, mobilized in the revolutionary struggle, or is it to be considered an enemy class? So I think that's the way one has to differentiate this, even while taking the position of going down to the most bottomless level of the masses and standing there. For example, in India, this is often characterized as the class line. One speaks of the mass line as well as the class line. And by class line, what is meant is precisely going to the bottommost level of society. Landless and poor peasants in the rural areas, as well as the unorganized workers and similar sections in the urban sectors. And the founder leaders of the Maoist movement in India, Comrade Charu Majumdar as well as Comrade Kanhai Chatterjee, were always insisting that the cadres should integrate with the masses at that level. They should rely upon them, they should take shelter there, they should live with them, and standing on that, one should try to organize and unite other sections of the forces. And this is something that you can see right from the early period of the Marxist communist movement itself. I think it's Engels who first pointed this out, of going to the bottommost level of society. So going to the bottommost level of the masses and considering the masses as a whole should be seen differently. It's not the same thing. When we say broadly masses, it means all these sections. One carries out a class analysis, and then on that basis, you take a stand of going to the most bottommost level, even while you don't take a sectarian attitude to other struggling forces. Particularly when these forces come into struggle, then it is definitely the task of the Maoists to unite with them and call upon other sections of the masses also to unite with them in that struggle. So this, I think, is how one should approach this question of what exactly the masses, what we mean by the masses, and how we should do our mass work also. I think that's all.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, just to maybe throw in here before asking others to connect to it, because it reminded me of certain things is, when people sometimes talk about the masses, we could have this one view where it just means like everybody, because everyone's in the mass in the world. But like, yeah, as we talk about as communists, we're looking at kind of, the masses, those used to be like the older category of the people, right? The people that capitalism is against, or something like that, right? I mean, and there's that very crude term that was used with the Occupy movement about the 99% versus the 1%. But once you have the 99% of the people, you really have to go in there as a Maoist, and as you said, go to the bottom most of, like, so that 99% may not like the 1%, but there could be a whole percentage of them that are totally connected to defending the 1%'s, class power or something like that. Or there's that percentage that are the police and the army, right? And they're not the ones that we mean as Maoists, the masses that we want to engage with. But this idea of going deeper into the masses, right? And that old term too about about locating or uniting the advanced, bringing up the intermediate, and isolating the backwards as well is like that kind of approach to like kind of find those bottommost forces. At least that's the way I've been taught to conceive it. But I would want to hear our other discussants' view on it. So I'm going to ask Swarav maybe to throw in next.
Yeah, Ajith said already the whole thing. Just that it's the most important thing that he highlighted is that in whichever country people are struggling, they need to first do the class analysis of that society. The firm class analysis of that society is what will bring them, who are downtrodden, who are the most oppressed sections of that country. So based on that, they can apply the principle of revolutionary united front. Yesterday we were all talking about tactical united front, that which political stream that we can, that the revolutionaries can tie up with, they can work with. But the revolutionary united front, that is the alliance of four classes, that's the most important thing. That is the real bastion of building up the whole revolutionary movement. So without a solid class analysis, building that is not that is not possible. And regarding the difference between the imperialist countries and the oppressed countries, the situation that Ajit was saying is kind of different, that all these petty bourgeoisie and middle classes are more towards the ruling class and everything. What I think is that here this principle of unity, criticism, unity is the most important thing that must be applied to overcome this whole problem. That's all.
Okay, Lance, do you want to add something to this?
Just a few points, I guess. Particularly, I do think that, as mentioned, that the masses are really the 99%. But again, I think that there's more to the question, where it's really asking, sure, we're organizing the 99%, but who shall be the core? Like, it touches on questions on who the proletariat is. Well, I won't really touch on that yet. But on the notion of the masses, I do think, yes, that you need to have a firm grasp on the class structure and the class dispositions in the country you're organizing in, as well as from this derive a revolutionary class line. That's not simply, again, since we've discussed from yesterday, class isn't a case. It's also not just based on how much you're earning, right? It's a social relation. So when you look for the revolutionary class line, you're looking both at the economic standing as well as the political stance, and from there, you're going to build how you're going to go through with the revolution. So, for example, in the Philippines, while you do have since it's a semi-feudal country, the peasant, when you look at the peasantry, it's not just the peasantry. We acknowledge that there's the rich peasants, the middle peasants, poor peasants, agricultural, like farmhands, etc. And even those have their own certain political stances based on where they are, right, in their class disposition. And I think when it comes to United Front work, we just reiterate what we said yesterday, that the core of the revolutionary class line really is that the core of the revolutionary class line should be the alliance of the peasant and the working class, with the work in a semi-feudal setting. That would be the working class um, as the vanguard, right? As the, forwarding their dictatorship, their class dictatorship, and the peasantry as your main force. But then that depends again on the class dispositions in the country you're in, and the middle class, the petty bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie, they're considered as progressive and positive forces respectively. But again, because they're the bourgeoisie, you have to also note how you will deal with these elements because they're in the middle. So I guess aside from what was said a while ago, I think what's important here is Mao's concept of uniting and struggling. That there can be no true unity without struggling, without the lines, the demarcating lines of where we can unite and where we don't disagree. If those aren't there, then the unity will be very shallow. So I think that's the crucial point. Like we will, as long as our principles and our cores are in check, and as long as we are conscientiously uh, exposing and isolating those who are supposed to be exposed and isolated, as well as a uh, praise or commend and criticize our allies who are on the middle side, then I think it should be fine. Thank you.
Does
Jyot,
anyone?
could I just
Yeah, I was
add something?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you wanted to. Yeah.
Well, first about this police and the army, one should never forget that they come from the masses and they are very much part of the masses, though they are at present the tool of the enemy. Because one often sees in the course of a revolutionary movement that large sections of these forces break away and come over to the side of the revolution. And even in other conditions, sometimes big struggles break out. Like, for example, in the late 70s, there was a series of struggles waged by the paramilitary as well as local police in various states of India, protesting against their living conditions and the service conditions where they were forced to work as servitors to the senior officers and all that. And quite correctly, the Maoists immediately extended support to that struggle, despite it's coming just after the emergency when these forces were very much engaged in the brutal torture and murder of Maoists, because that's a struggle which, when the people come out and struggling, then one should unite with them. And at the same time, put forward the revolutionary orientation, the perspective, and analyze why these things are coming up and where their interests really lie. I mean, it's not just uniting at any sake and all that, for any sake and all that. So, and I think this is, if you go through Lenin's writings, small pieces that used to come in the revolutionary journals of Russia, clandestine journals, he used to deal with all sorts of things. Like, for example, I remember, I don't recollect the title of that article, but something where he wrote about the Semastovs or something of that sort, like which was some thing set up by the Tsarist regime in the wake of the 1905 revolution, which incorporated significant sections of the local exploiters, lesser level of the exploiters and all that. And at some point, some contradiction had emerged between them and the regime. And at that time, the article, that's what I remember about that article, is that Lenin was quite critically, supporting that struggle, pointing out what is just in that, and at the same time pointing out that this issue cannot be resolved within or under the context while remaining within the Tsarist setup. So I think that should be the general approach of Maoists on these questions, that whenever these sections come out and struggle, we unite with them, we support their struggle and put forward our own correct orientation. And as the others also pointed out, the most important thing is rooting ourselves among the most basic sections of the masses, the bottommost level of the masses, with a clear class orientation. That's all.
Yeah, I think this actually though speaks to what we've kind of been discussing earlier about the difference of understanding the masses, say in a semi-feudal, semi-colonial context versus, like, say, an imperialist context, because I think there is, like, the police and the army are very differently composed now in the imperialist centers for this kind of thing. Like, I mean, there's that traditional view that comes from the October Revolution that you can, in the insurrection, you can split the army. But you know, that army wasn't like a fully capitalized imperialist army in the modern sense, right? And I mean, Karl Liebknecht. We've been thinking about this a lot in the context of imperialism, right? In the imperialist centers, is like Liebknecht wrote this book, one of the only few books he wrote on militarism, where he talked about how the rise of the modern capitalist army is going to look very different than the army of the czars and the army of that. It's going to have a very different composition, a very different, like a very stronger ideological alignment with capitalism. And I think in the context of Canada and the US, we find this very strongly so with the police specifically. The police specifically have arisen from a very white supremacist, like settler colonial background, and being able to see them in any kind of way as you know, someone that you can organize with, that they have any struggles that are legitimate. It's like there haven't been any for a long time. And in fact, they've strongly been very ideologically into defending the class interests, right? To the point of being very brutal towards colonized people and things. And then also the army, like there was this period of time in the, say, the US and Canada, where the army would rely on an economic draft. But recent, like the stuff that has been coming out in the last 20 years of who joins the army, they actually tend to be coming from the upper middle classes because they're being sold the story about how great it is to fight. So you don't get the same level of the economic draft that you used to get, say, in the Vietnam War. So, I mean, but this goes back to the whole thing, is that when we're talking about these masses, like doing a class analysis of where they fall in something is very important, because we have in Canada and in the US, there's been that long history amongst revisionists and Trotskyists of saying this idea that the police are working class too, and it's just they're divided by the baton. But every time people pursue that analysis, they get brutalized by the police, right? And so it's like it speaks to that importance of when we try to talk about the masses in general, we always have to bring, as you've said and Swarov has said and Lance has said, like a class analysis that is really connected to the social context, right? Like, because not all of these places are identical. I mean, an imperialist country is not the same as a peripheral country. And yeah, I think that's worth thinking about how different the army composition is, say, still in India versus the way it would be in like Canada or the US, and also the police. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I feel like it's going to be veered into this other discussion of the masses, but it's a really interesting discussion too.
One would have to look at the class composition of the forces in these imperialist countries now. I don't know exactly. It's an interesting point that you're mentioning, that it's no longer an economic interest that is driving them, but it's coming from the upper middle class and all that. But one thing, upper middle class still is part of the masses in a broad sense. And quite unexpected, surprising things happen under conditions of revolution.
Yeah.
So you can still have that flipping.
Yeah, I mean, when you go further, it's like one of the things about like.
And a final point is that even in the oppressed country, right now, the police and the army are the enemies of the people, in the sense that they really do brutalize and murder and do all sorts of nasty things to the people. And you don't say that they're working class and so let's unite with them like that. Yeah. You unite with them by bashing them up. That's the only way you can unite with them.
That's the kind of talk that we should have on this channel. Anyone else want to say anything more on this issue of masses?
Lance says something.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I do think that how would I say this? I lost my train of thought, but yeah, the whole thing about the police and the army and the class compositions. I think one thing that's really of note here is really going back to the mode of production, the social investigation aspect, because in semi-feudal countries, right, because of its semi-feudal condition, it's always undergoing a chronic crisis. So it's really going to affect how shitty things are. And it really will affect how, for example, the army composition will come to be. That even paramilitary army officers or the rank and file will have a tendency to kind of break away. But then again, it is true that politically, in terms of tactics, you never prop you never say in propaganda that we should unite with the police or sections of them. It's just out there. It's out there that there are sections of them, and of course, I mean, like here in tactically speaking, I mean there are. I've been told because I have like family members who are in the military, and when they found out that I was an activist, they started red tagging me, and they were telling me all these things about how the final draft of the counterinsurgency guide for the Philippines wasn't even released yet, but for some reason an NPA camp already had it. So there are there are those clandestine talks, but you don't prop them out in public. And I think though that the imperialist the characteristics in imperialist countries where the economy is generally boom bust. I think it is, as Ajit said, it's really the revolution has a lot of unexpected factors. Like at a time when maybe America or Canada or especially America is experiencing like a economic boost, then maybe there's really no external objective conditions for us to prop as much to other people. But then again, say with the case of the Vietnam War, right? I mean, even if, as Ajit says, that the upper middle class are still part of the masses, essentially, I think in politics, we have to remember that we go back to the objective conditions. That's how we organize. And I've been watching videos of like Marines or like American vets who came out of the war. No one wants war. It's the broadest political struggle. It's anti-imperialism. That even if you're sold to this idea of Americanism, that America is great. Once you're in there and you start slaughtering civilians, you will be faced with that great. Some people will just try to live with it, but then there's still that gap where they start to question the moral high ground on what they're doing. And as much as it is a given that because they're in an imperialist center, in fact, especially America, it's really the imperialist center. It's no wonder that the composition of the police and other forces where there might be gaps, is the gaps would be really small. So I think with that is that I think if especially for starting out organizing, I don't think the main thing really is to focus on these elements, but really focus more on expanding towards the people because there's a broader number of people who we can organize. But it's just there. Like when these elements, these shaky elements of the middle forces of the repressive state apparatuses or whatnot, they will some of them will come to our side if in the first place we're politically strong. So I think the primary aspect of this whole organizing fiasco is that we should get strong first among the basic masses before, not before, but like we put it in a primary aspect rather than the secondary of like, how about the national bourgeoisie? That those things come case to case. It's not just because they're in the police, they're national bourgeoisie, etc. It really comes by what are their political stances, their political background, their economic stance, etc. There's no one size fits all for it. For it, that's all.
Right.
Swarov, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I think enough has been spoken on this. So let's move to this next question.
Sorry, let's move on. I had myself muted. Yeah, let's move on. So I'm not seeing any. So just to remind people, those that are attending, that this session was supposed to be primarily based on live Q&A, not that. So if you have any questions, please input them in the question and answer box, and I'll get to them. And one just suddenly appeared on that. And someone asked regarding Josh's comment about composition of imperialist armies. Not sure if this is true, but my impression of the composition of the army is still mostly comprised of immigrants and lower economic classes. There was this random fact that only one US senator had family members enrolled in the military. I think it was John McCain. Growing up in poor economic neighborhoods in the US, I had several friends who were minorities go to the military because they felt it was the best career path for them. Separate but related point, FBI reports have shown white supremacists have infiltrated the military and other types of local and state law enforcement. P.S. I'm a friend of Mateo's, and he says he can't wait to join you guys at some point. Okay. So I don't know, the P.S. was funny, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's just the comment. I mean, this was based on a study that was released 5 years ago that just looked at kind of the economic composition of the US Army and the Canadian Army. I mean, I can't say much more to it except having seen that. And yeah, I'm sure there are people that are, the economic draft will still apply to some extent. But as people have said, I think it's like, we don't focus on the Army, but people will come over, right, when they get disaffected and things like that. And then the related point about white supremacists. I mean, that's a big issue about why I don't know about necessarily they've joined the army. There's been a long history of the American Army for a long time. Its backbone being white supremacists, right? There's like, it's really written into its DNA because of what, at least of what, like I've read about the development of the U.S. Army, of what the U.S. is from when it started first developing an army, especially with this first international war in the Philippines, right? And how it started conceiving that army and treating it in the same language as Indian territory, which is the kind of colonial bent of the same thing. So yeah, I think that still speaks to kind of the ideological problems. I don't know if anyone else wants to throw in on this specific question, because it just was an elaboration of the discussion we're having. I have some other questions. If people will all look at those, you can throw into that if you have anything to say.
Fastest
You
question.
want me to ask the next question? I think
the second one is related to what you were speaking about. What does it mean to be proletarianized?
Yeah, okay, let's do that one. So there's two more questions that appear just so everyone's watching. The first says, does anyone here consider the US a fascist state? Why or why not? And then the second one is, what does it mean to be proletarianized? What are some concrete examples of this process? And Ajith, you're saying let's deal with the second one first.
I mean, that was related to the topic we're speaking about.
Yeah, it moves into there. What does it mean to be proletarianized? What are some concrete examples of this process?
I should speak?
Yeah, go for it.
Now, I think that again would depend upon the different type of countries, that to be proletarianized in a context of India, for example, and that too again in different regions of India, it would be quite different. Basically, being forced to labor, in the sense of doing manual labor and all that for one's existence. Because as far as there is also those who do mental labor like teachers and all that, but there again one can see different categories where you have teachers who get a fixed salary and quite a high salary, who are therefore have an petit bourgeois existence and a petit bourgeois outlook also. Whereas there are other sections who are practically daily wage workers, contract workers, who can be dismissed at any time, whose existence is quite precarious. So if proletariat as understood in the sense of Marx, or the industrial proletariat, that's a different category altogether, I think. But the more important thing, question thing here is that, the way that Mao analyzes the classes in China, where he speaks about the working class and the semi-proletariat and so on. It's basically the question of understanding that section of the masses who have to live by their labor. They don't have anything else to rely upon. So when people get pushed in that sort of a situation, then one could definitely say that they are, as a physical existence, they are getting proletarianized, though it need not necessarily be reflected in the outlook thinking. Now, if you are speaking in the context of a Maoist party, of its cadres and its activists and all that, then I think that it would mean a different thing altogether. It would be a matter of getting declassified, particularly for those who come from non-working class or non-basic masses category. Basic masses, what we usually mean by that is the landless and poor peasants. Those who come from other classes, there's a question of they're getting declassified, and that would be the meaning of getting proletarianized in that context, because then it's not just a matter of your physical existence, but of a total change in your outlook, achieved by participating in class struggle and integrating with the basic masses. So this, I think, is the way one should understand that. Perhaps others could add something to that. That's all.
Anyone else want to add to that question about proletarianization?
I think Saurabh wants to say something.
No, I believe Ajith has said already.
I think, yeah, there is a difference between the proletariat with a T and a proletarian with an N, where it's as Ajit says that the proletariat as the T, that refers to the working class, those who live off their labor power alone. But then when you say proletariat, it's the people who, yeah, it's declassifying in a sense that you go to the masses and you objectively go out and do political work that actually coincides with the objective interests of the proletariat. So, like for example, let's say Marx, Lenin, Mao. I mean, they started out as petty bourgeois, but because they were consistently uh, fighting for the working class struggle, the proletariat struggle, you could say in the sense that they are proletarianized. But I guess there's a practical element to it that not only is it like a macro political thing that you do political work, but it's also a matter of like exactly it's more when Ajit says that it's a change in outlook, it's not as easy as it is, because when you say you change your outlook, it's really an ethical change where these class biases and habits and outlooks that we have been ingrained in, you have to start questioning that, and you have to start struggling even with yourself and amongst your comrades. What are the different habits that enable different oppressive structures or oppressive views? You know, that's one thing about being proletarian. It's both the political and it's also like an internal remolding kind of thing. It's why it's very difficult. It's a lifelong process to proletarianize,
Exactly.
especially when conditions are not such that we're under socialist construction. It's hard because no man is an island. So it's a difficult thing, but it can be done collectively and piece by piece. Really what it is, I guess. It's making a new person, essentially, new humans with new types of outlook. That's how promising it is, but also difficult. So that's my point.
Yeah, and I think like maybe to add to like both of what you were saying, there's always, and you brought this up too, I think the thing for us as Maoists who come from that, you know, the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist kind of background, the concept of the party is very important. The Revolutionary Vanguard Party is very important into conceiving of the proletariat, because there's both that the economic definition, which is like, you know, which was given already of the connection to the point of production. But there's like, even at that connection to the point of production, a lot of that working class may also have very, very bourgeois or petty bourgeois views about their position, because that ideology is so compelling, right? And so like the political, but of course the political aspect, right? We talk about finding like the advanced elements of the proletariat, who are not, you know, in Marxist terms, not just the class in themselves, but the class for themselves, and have that political view that, you know, that want to go beyond just like working under the kind of bourgeois reality, right? And accepting it as it is, wanting to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps or whatever. And so I think it's like the party kind of brings that consciousness into being, right? If it's embedded properly in the working class in itself, in the hardcore of the working class, and in the, you know, going down to the most oppressed sectors and most exploited sectors, and doing that mass line and learning from them, but can also brings in the perspective of that consciousness for itself, right? That's what the party is the kind of the subject of the proletariat in many ways. And if it's embedded in that working class, and I think, yeah, that's just to sum up kind of what both of you were saying too, and just to maybe bring back to some of the other questions of the vanguard, right? We want to keep prefacing that as well. Do we want to move on to another question? There's a bunch that are accumulating here, and we have, we're running out of time. So, okay, I mean, the same person that asked that one asked about US as a fascist state. I want to, that's an interesting question, and it's important, but we're trying to still keep connected to the stuff from the essay these are connected to, and I'm gonna maybe bracket that one if we have time. I might go back to it, but I want to give some other people questions to do that. And there's two that follow the one about the proletarianization. And the first one says, apologies if this was addressed last time, but do the comrades here have any opinions on the latest wave of 21st century socialism, i.e. recent MAS election victory in Bolivia and victory of Correistas in Ecuador? And I think we kind of addressed this issue of 21st socialism, obviously in general. We talked about Chavismo, but maybe just to answer this person's question quickly, we can summarize in our memories what we said about some of those general trends to address the specific stuff about Bolivia and Ecuador. Who wants to go? Saurav, do you want to go, since we've all been speaking and you haven't spoken for a bit?
I think this has been spoken yesterday, that regarding this 21st century socialism and this new left populism of Rainbow Coalition, not really depending upon any sort of vanguard parties, without any united front. What are the consequences that we have seen already, and the things are also ongoing. So I don't really think that all these new forms of the same thing, it's old wine in a new bottle every time. It's either the Evo Morales or Maduro or this Ecuador. Things are the same. So I think the main issue that we have discussed yesterday remains the same for everyone, with specific differences country-wise.
I mean, unless the other discussants want to say something, I think I'd say that, like, unless anyone wants to address Ecuador and Bolivia directly, like the issues we had, just generally, we had a long kind of talk about 21st century socialism and the Rainbow Coalition method in the first section. So it's worth watching that again. I think Saurav gave a good quick summary of that. And I think we can maybe move on to another one just to give some time for some stuff, unless Ajith or Lance want to say anything that question made them think about. No, you're good. Okay, so let's move on. There's a lot here. And so there's one that says, what is the role of the lumpen proletariat? And I guess it means, they say your specific People's War, but I think they mean the People's War in, I don't know if they mean the People's War that's going on in India or the Philippines, but we can look at it both, about the role of the lumpen proletariat in the People's War. And Ajith, do you want to go, or Lance, do you want to go first?
I think it's still a principle of uniting and struggling with them, because we have to realize that there's also kind of like a lumpen bourgeoisie, like syndicates, and the only thing that's making lumpen proletarians is that they're not the mafia lords, they're not the ones in charge, but they're doing these antisocial behavior. I think, to really just sum it up, it really depends, but we do have to note that because they are engaged in activity as really like the negative, not the negative, but really those really grisly aspects of capitalist society in the bourgeoisie, I think that it's gonna take some time for them to remold in that aspect, especially if, say, there's material conditions like, say, drug abuse, substance abuse. It takes time. I don't think, I mean, we just recognize that they are there, but in the revolutionary class line, it really depends on concrete conditions. You can't really say na, oh, let's go out there and organize them. We just organize people, and then based from their concrete conditions, their concrete needs, we struggle it out with them. Because there have been people who come from that class and there have been positive factors, but there have also been those who done really worse. So, and they get called out, or at worst cases really get taken out because of the antisocial behavior that they've done. That's for the Philippines, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a common thing everywhere. But it also depends upon the strength of the movement. When the movement progresses in a very, I mean, the revolutionary movement progresses in a very powerful manner, it's quite often seen that significant sections of the lumpen proletariat cross over to the side of revolution. But they're also the first to leave it whenever there is a setback or severe attack from the enemy. So it's a long process of remolding them. And that's the general attitude of the masses also. Masses don't like the anti-social activities. And but on the other hand, they do also recognize that they have come from among themselves. And so they rectify, then the masses welcome it. So I think we should go by that, I mean, depending on the circumstances.
Saurabh, do you have anything you want to say?
This question of the lumpens, if we see from the classical time, I mean, what Marx was seeing, the lumpen proletariat class, the 18 Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte is a best example where he deals with the question of the lumpen proletariat and what happens when the power comes into their hand. But if we see the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution, for example, we know that the lumpen proletariat has, in the time, as Ajith was saying, when the revolutionary upsurges are ongoing, they switch over to the revolutionary side. So I think on this very situation that we are standing, where the process of lumpenization is really fast, that the working class and the masses are being lumpenized. It's a process, and the system itself is pushing towards it. So I think the remolding procedure is the most important thing that one has to take. I mean, that's the most crucial thing that's gonna happen. After that, the whole revolutionary struggle will decide that what role they will play and what will be their position. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of brings up the issue altogether that we've been saying since the beginning about like a concrete analysis of a concrete situation and the different contexts, like China and the Russian Revolution and the situation in the Philippines and the India are very different than like 19th century Europe and and the role the lumpen actually existed. It was very different in that France and that kind of period. Even if we looked at the lumpen in imperialist countries, it's like there's certain lumpen forces that are like white supremacist biker gangs that are very different than, say, the lumpenization of people that live in on an indigenous reserve, right? They have a very different political content when you're talking about that, and yeah, it's just that looking at doing that kind of class analysis thing is really important. And I'm going to move on to another question, and there's one here that I think is worth one. It's asked is what does united with as many forces as possible look like on the ground, and how do we deal with all the ego when thinking about building a vanguard party?
Yeah,
Who wants to go first?
You have to turn that into energy, turn that into positive energy to build up the vanguard, I suppose. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Are you gonna go?
Yeah, all that ego. I was saying that you should turn all that ego into positive energy to build up the vanguard. If you have all that ego and it's going to exist as it is, then you're not going to have, let alone a vanguard, you're not going to even have a preliminary collective. So fight self, struggle against revisionism, and promote revolution or something that you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question about all the ego, it's like it goes back to some of the stuff we were saying earlier about proletarianization and like, you know,
Exactly.
in the last session, criticism, self-criticism, mass line, and the things that kind of the Maoist development of, you know, of revolutionary science tries to bring to this notion of keeping the party and the people in that always immersed in the masses to kind of change that consciousness. You were saying, you know, earlier about the revolution. You were mentioning to me before we were, you know, even online about a revolutionary in consciousness is kind of, you know, the aim, and that's kind of what Maoism has all been about, is this understanding that these things that we talk about, like that ego of the individual putting himself over someone else, that's like the bourgeois subject. That's the bourgeois thinking, right? And petty bourgeois thinking, and what a revolutionary party should, you know, try to fight against. Like a vanguard party itself should be the kind of party that tries to break that kind of thinking. Because even if you don't have a vanguard party, you have some kind of anarchist collective, that shit's in there as well, right? When I was an anarchist, that ego was everywhere, right? That bourgeois way of being, even from people that came from poor backgrounds, that desire to be the superstar is so compelling, right? And I think the Maoist party is the party that tries to create the mechanisms where we can kind of break from that. What do Swarov, Lance, do you have anything to say about that? And also, we kind of didn't really address the first part about being united with as many forces as possible look like on the ground.
I think that there's a question also, right, on the role of the vanguard in, say, in a nation that doesn't have a vanguard, and this whole question on the whole ego. I think, yes, these points are correct, but I think the advantage of being a Maoist party is that as Marxist-Leninist Maoists, we have to remind ourselves that the proof of the pudding is really in the eating of it. You know, you will never know what it's like unless you do it. And for you balance the egos that way, because we get it that we have to be aware that this is coming from a class background, but the ego is that those superstar egos are kind of shut down once you start going to the whole mode of practice, because that's what Ajit's saying. You transform it into positive energy in a sense that, okay, this is what you think is right, then go practice it. If it turns out that the model is working, then let's go with that. That's how we transform these theories, because I think there's a lot of questions, especially in countries that don't have an ongoing that don't have a vanguard party or don't have an ongoing people's war. I think the first step is, while it is important that it's crucial to study theory, I think, especially with how the objective conditions are in the world, I think we just have to be really decisive and start doing things, you know, based on what we've known, what we've gathered from this. In the Philippines, we have this saying na in Filipino, it's nahandaang kapasyahan bago ang kahandaan. Decisiveness comes first over readiness. You just have to go and do it. You know, you've studied the theory, you've studied history. Now the proof of it is really do it, organize, and you will see for yourselves what we've been saying in this webinar, that we need concrete conditions analysis, because you can't really analyze if you're just sitting from a safe spot. You really need to go there. That's really there's no shortcut to mass work. It's really what it is.
Yep.
Swarov, do you want to factor in?
Josh, if you go down, there is a question. It's for Lance and Saurav. Have you seen that? How close are the Philippine and Indian communist movements to taking state power? Did you notice that?
I saw that one, but I figured that might not be a good question to talk about because of security reasons or anything on this,
No,
right?
apart from the security question, I just want to address this point that if it isn't as close to how Chavistas has taken and maintained power in Venezuela, I just wanted to address that specific part of it.
Okay, so since you got to see it and decide to go through it, then you can go address that specific part on your decision and, and perusal.
I mean, I think the whole point of that essay, 21st century socialism in the 20th century, and also what's been talked about in this webinar is that the Chavistas have never been anything close to taking power and maintaining it. Because what do you mean by taking power? If it's coming to government, then we have had communist party, revisionist parties claiming to be communists coming to power in our state here several times. One of the communist parties, so-called communist parties, was a member of the central government in a certain period. So they've just been, in government and carrying out the wishes of the ruling classes. So coming to power means, for a Maoist and in the scientific sense, seizing of power. That has not taken place, and there has been no breakthrough or any radical change in the social relations or production relations or conditions in Venezuela. And that is the basic point. Unless you recognize that point, then you will not be able to understand the issues of building a revolutionary movement in whichever type of country. I think that's it.
Okay. I would, unless Swarv and Lance want to answer that, I might change to a different question just to do like one last question. Oh, we lost Ajith. Your camera's off temporarily. Oh, there you are. You're back. Okay. I'm gonna just ask one more question, and that is just for the final one, and we're gonna have to wrap it up tonight because we're just at the end. But let's take one more. Are you all good with taking one more? Yeah, I'll assume yes. It says, if we understand the importance and necessity of a vanguard weaponized with theory and its role, what are the consequences of not having a vanguard in a nation? And this person says, US in my context. Who wants to go? Gaurav, go for it. Yeah.
The answer is you vote for Biden. Yeah, that's the answer. I mean, what else? If you don't have a vanguard party, that means the people are not taking the hard work of doing class analysis, going to the masses, and this whole painstaking work is not being done. And therefore, what you do is do a Black Lives Matter movement, which ends up being a part of the ruling class, and then you vote Biden to power. I'm sorry for being sarcastic, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like but yeah, I guess it's like these are the consequences without a vanguard party. But it also talks about maybe understanding the importance and necessity of a vanguard weaponized with theory, and maybe as an ending, since we're talking about the vanguard of the 21st century, the last discussants can talk about what that means. What does it mean to have a vanguard weaponized with theory?
Maybe Ajith should go last. I'll just go first.
Okay, go, Lance.
So, well, the US example of it was probably already said by Suram. But I think that the consequences of it is that the role of theory here, when we appreciate theory, it's not just the lessons that it's not purely abstract. These are lessons on how we do revolution. And essentially, without the role of the vanguard party, it's like the organizational manifestation of the application of Marxism as a science. So if you do not have a body like that, then there is as essentially the advanced attachment that's pushing the revolution forward. What will happen is, as it said, that the external conditions are there, people will still be agitated, but because there is no vanguard party, all these different issues will remain at issue level. The role of the vanguard party is really to go down to the masses and link these issues and raise them up to a higher form of struggle, to the more decisive forms of struggle, depending on the context of the country. So if there is no vanguard party, and I mean, the vanguard party can only be a vanguard if it has the right theory that proves itself through practice. Without that, then it's really essentially like the masses are politically reinventing the wheel. we're not saying that it's doomed to failure. It's just that it's just going to take some time. The way to make a more modern analogy that I find amusing, it's like you're downloading a big file off the internet. It's like, you're going to get it someday, but then the estimated time says that it's going to be 30 hours. But once you fill in those prerequisites of the Vanguard Party, etc., it shortens 2 hours, etc. There's the qualitative leap into how things are done. Without that, it will get there. It's just gonna take some time because the practices and the manifestations of these practices organizationally are pretty backward, or at a level that's not as decisive in politics. That's what's my take on it.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. The I feel I must explain myself. That was part of sarcasm, but really, uh, you see, the movement that came up recently, the Black Lives Matter, and what is going on in the US since 2019. Even I can go a little back. I can say from the last of 2018. Actually, the people are protesting. The masses are protesting all over the country. I mean, things are coming up. There are, strikes. There are ongoing movement, and the Minneapolis thing was a spark of. But what did it actually produce? There are certain groups that we can see them in the Facebook. They're writing big stuff and on social media doing a lot of things. But the point is, what did they do when the movement was going on? Did they really take the painstaking work of going down to the most oppressed sections and organizing them, of building a vanguard party, of making a united front, of taking that movement forward, of developing it into something? I don't see that. They were busy writing, theoretical pieces, criticizing each other. I mean, that's the most sad part. And that old Bob is there, supporting Biden and all. So, weird things happened, and this what happened in US was really something that happened after decades. So it was a great chance that maybe the vanguard forces who are trying to, you know organize themselves, they could have taken this as an opportunity to do something bigger. But the sad part is, nothing came out yet. I just hope, I hope that some serious work has started, and that must take some concrete form. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's good point, Swarov. It's like we had the advanced section of the masses in the US like spontaneously rebelling, yet there was no party project that was able to unite them, right? And that's just for the years of not having, well, we know you made the joke about Bob, so we know where the RCP USA went after a long time, but I mean, a lot of the kind of like vanguard, like revolutionary party forces amongst the new African movement were, they were systematically like destroyed by like domestic warfare over many years of fighting of that, and there's that legacy of that. But it's like, but there was nothing there to take it except for that kind of new kind of like post Marxist view of spontaneism and movementism amongst people that could, that were activists, that were trying to organize these rebellious forces. But the lack of having an actual vanguard project that could do the work, it really showed, right? Because you had a mass rebellion like that we haven't seen for a while in the US, and no one was there to actually channel it into a party project in the way that would happen, and it has happened in the past, and it was pretty egregious. Anyhow, or not egregious, just shows that what's been lost in kind of, especially in the US and Canada and the imperialist countries, and the whole legacy of anti-communism that has like made it seem like it's not even viable to do that, or it's like something that belongs in the past. Yeah. Go.
Well, it's true that there seems to be a lack of any conscious effort. Seems to be, because one cannot be sure about that. It could be that things are taking place which are not yet have not come out visibly and all that. But overall, I would say that when the masses are out on the streets and are struggling, that definitely will bring up something. That's inevitable. It has never been the case that you have these hundreds of thousands of masses coming out and it's being wasted altogether. That has never happened in history. It's not going to happen again. And you can be sure that there would be something coming out of this. At the minimum, a realization that, that yes, we had this big movement, we had this big struggles and these big fights with the state forces and all that, but still we could not advance. And so why? What is the reason? Some forces within this starting thinking seriously, what are the reasons? I mean, look at what came out of the anti-globalization movement. It was a spontaneous movement. And to a great extent, it was led by reformist forces like the World Socialist Forum and all that, though they have was a strong anarchist component also. But I do believe that a large number of these Maoist groups, small groups or forces and all that have emerged in the Western countries have come out of that movement. When after a certain point, when that movement started fading out and people, those who were serious, who were really committed to doing something, they started looking around and they saw that this has to be addressed at a different level. So that's what I'm saying, that any churning up of the masses, any struggle will give its positive output. So what one can do as Maoist forces outside is, encourage it, try to push it on forward by doing theoretical activity and bringing out the real content of this whole movement and all that. So I mean, I'm not, I don't look at it from a negative standpoint, a disappointing thing that nothing came out. One can quite well understand why something has not immediately come out. But the fact that the masses are struggling, that's the most important. And as you said, it's come out of several decades. And definitely it's not going to be the last thing, because it's pushed up the whole agenda to a different level. The US ruling classes were forced to address it at a different level. It has deepened the polarization among them. It has had a lot of other positive impact. So this, I think, is what one should focus on. And genuine forces there, as Lance earlier said, what matters is the decisiveness, getting into the act. Whatever your force, it's small or big or whatever, you start by acting. You start by getting out there among the masses, doing propaganda, putting out your understanding. And through that, you attract forces and you build up your force. It's not easy in a country like America, where you have the whole state well organized to crush you on the hand, and also on the other hand, the social conditions are also there. But even then, I think that, the start point is that the masses are there. They are really angry and they really want to end the state. That's what's important. So how are we going to link up with that? That's something that we have to find. I mean, we means in the sense of broadly sensing, meaning the Maoists. Because that's there. It's not that the masses are passive or not ready for any serious action or anything of that sort. But it's immediately a revolution. That's not the issue. But definitely activity that leads up to it. So this, I think, is how we should look at it. And the consequences of not having a vanguard is very clear. As Saurav said, you have Biden instead of the revolution. Or you have a Bob Akin calling for support to Biden instead of a Maoist leader trying to rally the masses in a different direction. So yes, the consequence is quite clear. But the potential, I think that is what we should keep our sight firmly on. That's all.
I think that's a great place to end about the potential of these rebellions and like new rounds and new forces possibly emerging, because now we're 15 minutes past the time. So I'm going to just sign off for us and move it on to Christoph to say the final words of tonight.
Hello again. So thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you, especially Saurav and Ajith for waking up very early. I think this discussion, those two sessions were very interesting. Yeah, they are recorded. So you can watch them on YouTube. They will be uploaded. And I hope this kind of study I hope we can do another study maybe sometime. And yeah, that was a good experience overall. So thank you everybody. Thank you, Josh, for moderating. And I wish everybody a good evening, day, night, whatever. And take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, right. Salute everybody.